Once Trump has the most law firms, universities, news organizations, and private companies under his thumb, it'll become almost impossible for any form of opposition to gain traction. His weaponized Department of Justice can arrest protesters, and there will be fewer lawyers to defend them. University research and academic discussion of ideas that run counter to the Trump ideology of ideas, to the Trump ideology will be threatened. Private companies will not object as the rule of law collapses. This is not some innovative new strategy. It is the global playbook for democratically elected leaders who want to stay in power forever. Why is the Financial Times speaking with more backbone than like any news organization? Isn't there a joke about like communists read the Financial Times? Because when it comes, like, if there's anything capitalists are serious about, it's money. So they're like when they're writing the articles here, they're here to take shit seriously. Yeah, he's fucking up the bag. Also, the best administrators of capitalism are and always have been communists. Like, you put capitalists in charge of capitalism, they fuck everything up, man. Maybe I should have a Financial Times subscription. It's the most expensive newspaper, though, by far. Yeah. Are they left-leaning? No. No, they're not. Yeah, $75 per month is insane. I guess it'd be a write-off for me, but still. That's crazy. Yeah, they're right-wing for sure. Notably, one of Luxemburg's critiques was the socialists in Europe were simply becoming more competent stewards of capitalist systems, which would just suppress internal contradictions for longer. Aren't we kind of seeing that happen right now? Because now, like, rather than the government being run by a coalition of practical-minded capitalists and like bureaucratic technocrats, now all the people running the government are like hog-wild capitalists, you know? Like, every single person in charge right now is like an insane, short-term gain-driven, lunatic, private profit motive type individual. So it seems like now that the hogs are in charge, the internal contradictions are ramping up massively. I don't know, man. Maybe the accelerationists were always right. Maybe like you have to let the most capitalists run the system because it takes basically no time for them to break everything. I don't know. It sounds right. We've had fascism before. Contradictions didn't contradict. Well, I mean, there's a difference between like the internal contradictions of fascism and the internal contradictions of capitalism, even if both of them like overlap, right? Fascists are almost always capitalistic. But like the German, the Third Reich was governed primarily off of the ideology of Aryan supremacy, you know? Like, the Nazis were hyper-capitalistic. They favored industry oligarchs. They privatized relentlessly. They worked alongside the bourgeoisie. But the Nazis were not themselves necessarily the bourgeoisie. They worked with the bourgeoisie. But their ideology was different. The bourgeoisie went along with it, you know? The internal contradictions there, you have like overlaps. But what brought Germany down, ultimately, wasn't capitalism, right? It was fascism. And again, there are overlaps, but it's pretty clear where the blame lies in that case. And right now, we're seeing both, as we did before, but the people who are in charge of the administration now are much more capitalistic than they are fascistic. It's the other direction, right? For the Nazis, capitalism was a convenient economic driver for their ideology. And now, fascism is a convenient political driver for the economic ideology of the people in charge. For most of them, not for all of them. For people like J.D. Vance, Stephen Miller, some notable others, their ideology is fascism. They want fascism for the sake of fascism, you know? They're not casual racists, they're professional. But for a lot of them, you know, especially Trump, fascism is just a convenient way of getting applause while you talk about cutting Social Security. What about Peter Thiel types? Peter Thiel is 100% ideologically fascist. 100%. Thiel's a techno-feudalist? Yeah, fascist. Do they even think they're fascists? I don't really care. I don't really care. It's as an ideology, it does not encourage critical thought or introspection of its zealots. So like whether or not they're in on it is kind of irrelevant to me. But for somebody like Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance, probably, yeah. Peter Thiel might not think he is because he might be bought in on his own sauce. Like, I would fully believe Stephen Miller is aware of the fact that he's a fascist. Peter Thiel might legitimately think that he's the only guy smart enough to save humanity, which is why he should be God King. Not sure. He doesn't come across as very bright to me. But that, in his mind, then he wouldn't think he's a fascist. He would just think that he's humanity's savior. Different thing. I mean, not different from our perspective, but different from his. Yeah, Steve Bannon's another 100% like knowing fascist. You get what I mean, though, about the difference between fascists using capitalism as an economic driver and capitalists using fascism as a political driver? Basically, every fascist takeover of a country can be broken down into those two categories. Usually, in my opinion, it's what we're seeing right now, with fascism being a convenient political driver to justify economic oligarchy. That's what happened in Russia, after all, right? Like, the guiding ideology of the Kremlin is not principally fascism. They're lay epic trolls. They dance around their points. They don't believe in anything. They put out all that misinformation because it advances a doctrine that allows them to continue to be the oligarchs that they are. Yeah, extraction is the ideology. Like how you say Xi uses fascism to keep China stable, capitalism and decay and whatnot. Yeah, I think in the case of China, it is like fascism being employed callously as a way of stabilizing a social situation. But the social situation they're trying to stabilize isn't really capitalism itself, but more like the Chinese social fabric after their big industrial and economic revolution, right? Like, after Dengism and the following reforms led to a massive increase in the quality of life for most people in China, those reforms can't be sustained indefinitely, or rather socialistic. There's nothing socialistic about China, not really. Isn't China more authoritarian than fascist? I would have said just blanket authoritarian if we were talking about China 20 years ago, but lately the CCP has been a lot more aggressive in using fascist rhetoric as a way of legitimizing itself. But it's complicated. All these things exist in spectrums. Political definitions aren't cohesive. They're not all-encompassing. They're not concrete. It just doesn't... it's never that simple, you know? Which country isn't fascist these days? Too right, brother. Is there any practical difference between the two types of fascism? Look, it manifests differently every time, right? No two democracies are alike. This is partly why the Nazis sometimes contradicted hyper-capitalist ideologies. Much of the German Reichstag supported the Nazis because they wanted to restore the German monarchy, but the Nazis just wanted to hurt minorities, so sometimes they would do vague redistributive policies. Yeah, the contradictions here, I mean, they arise largely because, like, for instance, the bourgeoisie under Germany in the Third Reich benefited initially, but then suffered. It turns out the bourgeoisie do not actually benefit from, like, you know, Berlin being firebombed, right? Like, as it turns out, the Third Reich was actually pretty damaging to most German industry on account of the whole, like, losing the war thing and all the, like, death and suffering and, you know, the war thing, basically. So they didn't really benefit from it. In that case, the fascists ended up more or less betraying the interests of because the German industry oligarchs would have much preferred any situation where they could have just carefully, methodically consolidated and expanded their industry, right? They just want to make money. That's their goal. Everything else is just a legitimizing mechanism. Over here in the United States, we see the opposite pretty often, right? Like, Nazis love Trump, and there are Nazis in the Trump administration, but we keep supporting Israel, right? There are things that we do for the interests of our capital owners that contradict the legitimizing ideology, you know? So the real dialectic here is when you do fascist things that contradict the interests of capitalists, like the tariffs, or when you do capitalist things that contradict the interest of the fascists, like supporting the MIC by backing Israel, you know? Like, are we isolationist with the tariffs, or are we not with indefinitely supporting Israel, you know? It's a complicated mess. H-1B visas. Fantastic example. Boopy Box Fox. Thank you very much. Fantastic example, right? You have an administration that's super duper 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 anti-immigrant, and then some of the more, like, openly Nazi Trump supporters are like, yeah, get these H-1B visa Indians out of here. And Trump and Elon are like, whoa, buddy, those are economically productive immigrants. They should stay. And then you have the contradiction, right? You have people who just want to make money, juxtaposed against people for whom hatred and racism are the ideology. Those are the point, you know? Yeah, you get it. You get it. You get the point. You get the point.